Well, let me begin like this. I think if we look back, Myanmar has always been a challenge for Thai foreign policy. Myanmar has been a dilemma for Thai po- policymakers, and it's all about geography because our policy has to be premised on the fact that we share 2,400 kilometers of common border with Myanmar. And so the first point that I wanted to make was that we have to deal with the realities of the situation in Myanmar. That's very important, and we cannot afford to simply base our policy on hopes, on wishful thinking. You know, of course, we'd like to see Myanmar at peace, stable, and unified, definitely. But how to get there? I think that's the challenge. And looking back, and also, and I think this was the point that you made, Hashim, is that it's not just what's happening in Myanmar that determines our policy. It's what happened in Thailand as well that determines the course of our policy on Myanmar. So when we had, if it's a democratic government, it's one direction. If it's a military-led government, it's another direction. You know, so you have to bear that in mind as well. But I would say, looking back for maybe for the past 2 or 3 decades, our policy has been one of constructive engagement. But there's been various modes of constructive engagement. Sometimes passive constructive engagement, sometimes positive, proactive, constructive engagement. And because since independence, Myanmar has been ruled by a military dictatorship. And so I think for us, constructive engagement has been the approach that we've taken. And but then constructive engagement can be viewed two ways. It could be viewed as justifying business as usual. That is probably the passive approach on constructive engagement. It can be viewed as recognizing the need to engage, to have dialogue, to encourage positive changes in Myanmar. That's the more proactive approach of constructive engagement. So much of our policies on Myanmar has been based on this policy of constructive engagement. But I wanted to point out that you can view constructive engagement in a passive or in a proactive way. But we really had a proactive policy of constructive engagement during the time of the government of the Democrat Party, because the Prime Minister Kun Chun Lik Pai at that time and the Foreign Minister Kun Surin Pitsuwan were believer in liberal democracy. And at that time, we were recovering from the financial crisis. So we had to endear ourselves to the Western countries and to the international financial institutions because we need their assistance. And also, I think Kun Surin believed strongly that Thailand should be the champion of democracy and human rights in ASEAN. And in fact, we were. And so he advocated a more proactive approach on constructive engagement called flexible engagement, which really caused a big stir among ASEAN, because flexible engagement, as espoused by Kun Surin, was that now that we are an ASEAN family, we should be able to talk about domestic affairs. We should be able to talk about, express our domestic concern. And so that was his approach. but it was not well received by many of the ASEAN countries. So more or less, he had to, I wouldn't say abandon, but probably adopt a low profile when it came to flexible engagement. After that, we also had constructive engagement during the time of Prime Minister Thaksin, because the government at that time saw immense economic opportunities in Myanmar. And so if Myanmar could open up to the world and engage in reforms, this would be beneficial to Thailand's economic interests. And also at that time, Kun Thaksin had aspiration for Thailand to show regional leadership. Remember, if you may recall, at that time we initiated ACMEX, the framework for cooperation in the Mekong sub-region. We also started what we call the ACD, Pan-Asia Cooperation, the Asia Cooperation Dialogue. And some of you might not recall, but during the time of Prime Minister Thaksin, when Kun Surikiat was the foreign minister, we had what we call the Bangkok process. The Bangkok process, I think in the year 2004, I think, where we organized a meeting in Bangkok. We invited representatives of countries from ASEAN, from Western countries to come, and we invited the foreign minister of Myanmar at that time to talk about the roadmap to democracy. I think it was a good initiative, but eventually there was a falling out among the leadership in Myanmar. Those days you had three generals running the country: General Tan Shui, General Mong A, and General Kin Yun, who was the reformist among the three. But then eventually, I think Kin Yun was put under house arrest. The foreign minister was jailed. And that policy of the Bangkok process came to an abrupt end. So, but then, then Myanmar started its own reform process, because I think Myanmar joined ASEAN in 1997. And Myanmar recognized that unless Myanmar reformed, Myanmar would not be able to catch up with ASEAN. Myanmar would be left by the wayside. So they eventually, General Thein Sein became president. He started a transition process. Aung San Suu Kyi was released. There was by-election in 2012, and then her party, NLD, National League for Democracy, were represented in the parliament. And then you had the election in 2015, which brought Aung San Suu Kyi and her party to power. At that time, I was amazed with the progress of change. You saw, how economic prosperity was coming to Myanmar. Yangon was bustling, even Naypyidaw was bustling. And so, I think as a neighbor, you were happy that they were on this course. And that's good for Thailand as a neighboring country, because their peace is our peace, Their prosperity is our prosperity. But then came the event in February 2021. We didn't expect that, really. But of course, in politics, we always expect the unexpected. And somehow, the conflict between Madam Aung San Suu Kyi and General Min Aung Hlaing, came to a point where they could not coexist anymore. And so we had the coup. And so, of course, with the coup, the premise of our policy still about geography, but we had to change our approach. But anyway, I wanted, at this, responding to your question, geography, reality, but also some hopes and aspiration as well. And at times we've been passive, at times we've been proactive. Right? So that's the reply to your first question.
All right. So that seems to already lay down the foundation for all of us to see how geography, reality, and at the same times the process within the countries, particularly domestic forces in Thailand, really also do shape how we perceive Myanmar in the Thai foreign policy. But at the same time, you also reflect on Myanmar internal process that has an impact on this as well. So the next one to follow up, it's basically to also think about this in the context of the present days, right after the military coups that are actually happening. To what extent? Because as you said, it's unexpected, but and then we may always have to expect the unexpected, right? How to what extent that shapes the approach of Thailand in formulating and also implementing foreign policies, because of these also happening during the time when there was the pandemic is going on, and as it's evolved, we also see war in different places around the globe as well, with the geopolitical changes and these different dynamic that happening. How would all these different things affect the way the Thailand's think or conceive of foreign policies toward Myanmar? What's this?
Well, first of all, the situation after the coup in Myanmar to me represents three crises. First, the crisis in Myanmar. Second, the impact on neighboring countries, Thailand, China, and India, Bangladesh, and also a crisis of ASEAN, a crisis of ASEAN's unity and centrality and credibility. So we have to bear that in mind. When the coup took place, I think it took time for ASEAN to come to a common position and to decide on what to do. Because in ASEAN there are genuine believers in the policy of non-interference, genuine believer because of their own political situation. There are also who sometimes, I hate to say this, use non-interference to justify no action. So, so it took time before we could really come to grips with the situation. And then we had the special summit in April, right? And we came out with the 5-point consensus. But again, the 5-point consensus is on paper. The challenge is how to act on the 5-point consensus. And I think because of the different perception we have of the situation in Myanmar, we have not been really able to act with unity on the 5-point consensus. And one of the frustration I have, following the meetings of the foreign minister, the summit, and having attended some of these meetings myself, is that when the agenda item comes to the situation in Myanmar, everybody says the same thing. We reaffirm our commitment to the 5-point consensus. We support the ASEAN Special Envoy. That's it. We never talked about the strategy. What is the strategy to implement the 5-point consensus? It's not like when we had the conflict in Cambodia, everybody was on board. Everybody felt that ASEAN's security was the whole of the region was at stake, and we worked together, collectively, individually, on trying to find a solution, a resolution to the crisis. So it was very different, the response. Hate to say a lot of lip service, but going through the motion. And and Cambodia, Thailand took the lead and on Cambodia because we were the frontline state. In the case of Myanmar, Thailand is the frontline state again, but we did not take the lead during that time because our government was a military-led government, General Prayut. That's the fact. And so in the thinking of the government at the time was, you know, we were quite silent in terms of criticizing what happened, because if we criticize, it may be a way of, it would we'd be criticizing ourselves because the because the government came to power also by way of a military coup, right? And some say that Myanmar was using the same playbook as the General Prayut at that time. Second, I think the the assessment of our national security people at that time was, military to military ties are important for border security, border trade. And there was also a genuine belief that the military would win. The Myanmar military would win. And that the role of the Myanmar military is important for the stability of Myanmar, because Myanmar is a country with many, many fault lines, right? So it was the thinking at that time that led Thailand to maybe to support the 5-point consensus, but adopt a different approach. Indonesia was taking the lead in terms of trying to champion the cause of democracy, trying to find ways of implementing the 5-point consensus. But it was a lot about Indonesia, not about ASEAN as a whole. But Thailand, we also supported the 5-point consensus, but we had a different approach. Our approach was engagement, which is good. I always believe in engagement. But the engagement that was conducted at that time was seen as supporting the regime, appeasement of the regime. It worked out that way. So that was the difficulty at that time, was that first, ASEAN was not really united. ASEAN did not have a collective strategy on implementing the 5-point consensus, and there was a rift between Thailand and Indonesia. You can sense it when you're in the ASEAN meetings, And so that was the real problem when I came in. I came with Foreign Minister Panpri. He was the foreign minister, and I became vice minister. How to get things back on track, right? And how to demonstrate Thailand's role, because we had disappeared from the radar screen. Thailand, when our partners talk about ASEAN, leading countries in ASEAN, Thailand is in the second tier now. It's no longer in the first tier. So for us, it was also using Myanmar as a platform to regain the role that we had played in ASEAN, right? And so when we came to office, we thought, what should we do, And so first, we had to get back to the 5-point consensus. We had to show that we were fully behind the 5-point consensus. But at the same time, we also have to have our approach as well, but one that does not depart from the 5-point consensus, like what happened during the time of Foreign Minister Don and Prime Minister Prayut. And so we came up with this idea of the humanitarian corridor. Humanitarian corridor to facilitate humanitarian assistance across border, and then we hope that by way of humanitarian assistance, this could rally all the sides of the parties in Myanmar towards some kind of a dialogue, at least a humanitarian dialogue, and maybe we can build on that. But it took, and this is one of the difficulty when you talk about peace in Myanmar, dealing with the military regime, because the only person that can make a decision in Myanmar is the senior general. And sometimes if you try to, even through the foreign minister, sometimes the messages, the views are not entirely conveyed to the scene in general. And sometimes, when you engage in discussion with their leadership, ministers, you have either they don't acknowledge the reality, and or perhaps they're under some kind of illusion, that things are still going their way. And it's very difficult when you negotiate. Well, I'm trying to be very frank today, but sometimes you feel that you're negotiating with a wall. And so it takes a lot of patience, a lot of effort, but just to try to convince the regime that opening up the border for humanitarians was a good thing. A good thing so that they can return to engagement with ASEAN, so that they can show that they're doing something positive. For the international community can welcome, this sort of development. But it took a lot of, I think, months, 3 or 4 months of negotiation. Eventually, they decided to allow one delivery across Mesot. And by the time that the delivery was about to take place, the situation on the border had changed. You had fighting, especially in Myanmar, and there was a change of heart, change of mind at the very last minute. I got a phone call from the WhatsApp from the foreign minister, said, "Can you just leave everything at the border?" Because we had agreed that the assistance would be delivered with supervision to 3 villages, and there would be witnesses to in the handing out of the assistance to the people in the 3 villages. But then they had a change of mind, and they wanted us to deliver it at the border at Modi. And I said that can't, because our credibility would be at stake. And so we went ahead anyway. And so we thought that, perhaps we could scale up humanitarian assistance, use humanitarian assistance as a way of talking with the ethnic groups along the border, and try to, convince them to some sort of having some dialogue with the military regime, and convince the military regime to have some dialogue as well. But problem is that Minister Panpri decided to resign, and I also left because I'm not a politician, and so we have a new team at the foreign ministry. Their thinking has changed much because the role of the former prime minister is now, I think, much of the policy on Myanmar is determined by the former prime minister and the role he aspires to play. And of course, he has the other hat as well, advisor to the Prime Minister of Malaysia, which I think is good that, there is high level engagement. It's good that Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim is engaging with Min Aung Hlaing, also engaging with the leadership of NUG. But for engagement at that level to work, you really need a lot of groundwork, so that we're clear as to the issues that we're going to discuss, and we understand the position of each side. And I think one of the problems for me when they had the meeting in Bangkok was that there was really no groundwork done, and Min Aung Hlaing was caught by surprise by some of the requests made by Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim. We were surprised that Min Aung Hlaing was not really ready to, to engage in depth, substantive discussion, because I think the groundwork had not been done. So,
All right, we getting close to the more recent situations, but what you have show us right now, Sinrin, right after the coup, it seems that there are some changes already happened in the way that Thailand's engaging, and particularly during the time that you were in office also with the try to operationalize 5-point consensus, which seems to be something of a struggle right now until now to reaffirm 5PC, but there's still no concrete plan on how 5PC is actually operating basically. And at the same time, you mentioned that humanitarian corridors had already been conducted, but then of course because of the change in the ministry, it couldn't continue and so on. And nevertheless, there are also the attempts to do dialogues and all these different foundations. But then what happened this year, we see in March with the earthquake also, it's add another layer to the complexities of it. May I ask you, Ambassador, can you also reflect on the current state of the Thai foreign policies? As you mentioned briefly just now, also that our former prime ministers become advisors to the chair of ASEAN. And at the same time, now with the role that Malaysia tried to engage with Myanmar as well, particularly through the humanitarian assistance that Malaysia has also provided as well. Can you assess the current state, so to speak, of the Thai foreign policies toward Myanmar? And at the same time, what are some of the implications for the broader regional development and perhaps in the area? Because we've seen that even though there are some kind of engagement that going on, there are some other problems that started to emerge also as well afterwards. Ambassador.
Well, I think on the side of the Thai government, we have not really sorted out our policy on Myanmar yet, because I think the former prime minister would like to broker the peace. But at the same time, we haven't really strategized what we're going to do, At the same time, we seem to be embracing the plans of the military regime for election. And the problem also, in my view, is that there is no coherence inside the Thai government on Myanmar. This was very obvious when we did the humanitarian assistance, where the foreign ministry had to coordinate among all the agencies, the internal agencies, even coordinate between the armed forces and the Thai army. That was, because we didn't have a coherent policy on Myanmar. And so that's another challenge for Thailand. On the other hand, you have the chair of ASEAN trying to, do what the chair should be doing to implement the 5-point consensus. And so I think, first, engagement. Second, more continuity in ASEAN's effort, because the efforts of ASEAN to implement the 5-point consensus has been impeded by the change of chairmanship every year. So the idea of having a permanent, let's say at least on a 3-year basis, the special envoy, I think that's a good idea because we have some continuity, right? So engagement and continuity is important. But it's how you engage is also very important, because you should not engage in a way that is seen as legitimizing the regime. So we have to make it very clear to the regime that engagement is a two-way street. If we're going to continue with this engagement approach, then there has to be something to show to justify our engagement, ASEAN's engagement, right? And so I think that's very crucial, and of course, the need for continuity that I mentioned. On the humanitarian assistance, it's really unfortunate. It's a lost opportunity. On the earthquake, when we had the tsunami and it hit Aceh badly, it was an opportunity for every party to try to come together and work a peaceful solution. And Aceh is at peace today because of the tsunami. But that has not happened with the earthquake in Myanmar. It seems that each side is still seeking to gain advantage on the ground, even though they say that they're supporting a ceasefire. The regime says that the other side is not respecting the ceasefire, but the regime is also not respecting the ceasefire using drones, and which has affected so many civilians. So, so it's unfortunate that the earthquake did not create an opening or the opportunity for some kind of dialogue among the parties in Myanmar, the military regime and the opposition with an S, the opposition with an S. And that's one of the problems that we face because the opposition is not really a united opposition. And they have not been able to translate their success on the ground into a real negotiating position. And so that's how I see the situation now. And perhaps that leads in your next question.
Certainly. Yes. And then based on what you mentioned also with the creation of already the positions, I mean, the ideas of having a permanent envoy right now. Before I also maybe including into my next questions that I already here we have is that you think that should Thailand take the lead on this and going back to the proactive policy or roles that Thailand used to play when it comes to neighboring countries issues here, how do you see that? I mean that's just like come out of the discussions that we have just now with the ideas of the permanent envoy, but then also looking ahead because we see a situation, for example, right now that the interests on Myanmar, even in news now, it has been shifted over the past few weeks because of the situation in Cambodia that's actually happening. How should we, or how should Thailand recalibrate its foreign policies towards Myanmar? And what role in that sense, that MFA should be doing more, or the military should be the one doing, or who should be the one, or the National Security Council should be the one playing these coordinating role so that the coherence or coherency is going to be coming back there, or it will not happen. That's one of the thing. And then the other thing is that what role also Thailand should also play in regards to ASEAN's with on specifically on Myanmar as well. Yeah, maybe the last question for now.
Well, I think that it's not just about Thailand recalibrating. It's about ASEAN also recalibrating its policy on Myanmar. You know, 2025, to my mind, can be a very crucial year where we either win the peace or we lose the peace. And for us to win the peace, we all have to come to terms with realities, all of us, all of us. First, what is the goal that we seek in Myanmar? We seek lasting peace. We seek Myanmar that is unified, not fragmented. But we have to bear in mind that if we don't find a solution that provides the answer to a lasting peace, it's not going to be a lasting peace. Because Myanmar, people have said that Myanmar is probably the country with the longest civil war in the world, one of the countries with the longest civil war. Since independence, there has been 3 ongoing struggles in Myanmar. First, the struggle of the ethnic groups for autonomy, self-determination. The struggle of the military to maintain its primacy in politics, in the politics of Myanmar, in the national life of Myanmar, because they perceive themselves, rightly or wrongly, as the provider of security, stability in Myanmar. Third, the struggle to achieve the democratic aspiration of the people of Myanmar. And the struggle for democracy has become stronger, more intense after the military coup, because the people had a taste of democracy already. And the struggle, now the situation is more complicated. Before you had the military, Aung San Suu Kyi, and the NLD. Now it's not that. You have NLD plus the PDF, the young people. You have the ethnic groups who have achieved successes on the ground. They're not going to be content with going back to the 2008 Constitution. No way. So it's going to be it's not going to be a simple solution. It has to be a process. And so all of us has to come to term. First, the reality is that a military solution is inconceivable. If there is a military solution, it's going to be at great cost and suffering to the people of Myanmar. And perhaps it will lead to fragmentation or more instability. That's the first point. Second, the military regime also has to recognize that the ties on the ground is not on their side, and the idea of election, if it's not preceded by dialogue and some degree of inclusivity, then it's not going to be recognized, and it's not going to lead to peace. So that reality has to be recognized by the SAC, the military. Third, the opposition, again with an S, has to recognize that they've achieved a lot of successes on the ground, but they're also facing a lot of challenges in administrating the territories. Right? It's not difficult to deliver to the daily needs of the people, humanitarian needs. It's not. And then, going back to the point I made earlier, is that they have not been able to translate their success into a viable negotiating position. Because when you have success, it comes to a point where you have a stalemate on the ground. And when you have a stalemate on the ground, it may be the opportunity for some talks to begin. And so because the opposition has not come up with a viable negotiating position, and the military still insists or still believes that it has the upper hand, even though that's not the case. So we don't have that kind of confluence yet. But then ASEAN also has to come to reality that if we don't work together, if we don't have a strategy, if we don't try to work with China, if China does its own thing on Myanmar, that's not something that we as a region would like to see, because you said, we don't want Myanmar to become another arena for geopolitical competition, right? And so we have to talk with China, we have to talk with India, because the neighboring countries exercise a lot of influence over the course of events in Myanmar. At least, as you know, the ethnic groups along the border, the neighboring countries exercise considerable influence. So all of us really have to come down to reality and try to think about peace. Western countries also, because for most Western countries, Myanmar is very distant. So it's all about this abstract concept of democracy. So you talk with Western countries, what do you want to see in Myanmar? Democracy. What is your approach? Sanctions. But how do we get there? So what I'm saying now is that if all of us come to terms with reality, given the confluence of events that we see now, perhaps this can be an opportunity to start a kind of peace process. But we have to also recognize that peace is not going to happen in one leap. Right? In Cambodia, how many years it took? You had a transitional authority, you had UNTAC coming in before they could organize election. And we have to recognize also that even, the elections, if it's fair and free, it's not going to be a perfect election, because it's only part of the process towards a solution. There's so many issues that they have to discuss after the election: the constitution, what kind of makeup for the future of Myanmar, What about federalism? How are they going to work it out, together with democracy? So, so we have to really be thinking of how to work together. What is the process? What are the steps in this process? And so that's how I see it. But if we don't really think in concrete terms now, we'll never get there. And Thailand has, I wouldn't say take the lead, but Thailand has the legitimacy to to play a leading role because we are one of the neighboring countries. We feel the impact of what's happening in Myanmar. And so the role that I envisage for Thailand, and we tried to do that when Foreign Minister Pranpri was the foreign minister, to connect the dots. Connect the dots in ASEAN, connect the dot with China, connect the dot with India. It's not just about having one meeting with, all the groups and then they agree. You have to do shuttle diplomacy. You have to talk with the Chinese. You have to get ASEAN together. You have to talk with the Indians because they're afraid that China is expanding its influence in Myanmar. So they have an interest, in peace and stability in Myanmar. Bangladesh as well. So Thailand should do that in terms of connecting the dots. But to do so, we have to be very proactive. We have to be clear as to what is the process, what are the steps. Maybe when we don't have to be clear as to the whole process yet, but we have to be clear as to what are the steps that need to be done, which could lead to another step, which could be part of, this process that we talk about. So that's how I see it.
Thank you very much. I mean, so I think that's a clear message. I mean, also to ASEAN at the same time, also to Thailand as well, on how we can perceive or think about things forward. And that's perhaps the end of the first round of the conversations. The second round now I will open to the public and then engage all of you here for any questions or concerns that you may have with regards to the topics that we have at hand today. And then we have roughly around 20 to 25 minutes for the conversations to actually go ahead.
Can I make a remark
please.
that I see the ambassador of Philippines taking notes because the Philippines will be the next chair of ASEAN, and so the role of the Philippines will be very important soon.
And if Ambassador wants to take the first questions, I would be really happy. Ambassador, please.
Thank you very much. So I'm Millicent Paredes. I'm Ambassador of the Philippines to Thailand. I'd like to thank Vice Foreign Minister Sihasak for this very clear talk and the aspirations that we all want to pursue. I just have a few questions. First, about the dynamics between the junta and the armed ethnic organizations. Because I remember when you had a briefing on the humanitarian corridor, I had this impression that Thailand needed to get the consent of both the junta and the armed ethnic organizations to get this going. And then with respect to scam centers, which has been happening since 2022, we've been repatriating Filipino victims from that area since 2022. And it was only this year that there was a clear platform that was agreed between Myanmar and Thailand to facilitate the repatriation of victims passing through Thailand. So I could see that there's really some form of dynamics and sort of agreement or recognition perhaps of the power that the ethnic armed organizations are also wielding. And how will this figure in the proposed elections that the junta is proposing? Thank you.
I forgot to mention that actually before this policy of constructive engagement, we had a policy of buffer state because there was really no trust between the Thai government and the military regime. This was in the 80s. And our policy at that time was to cultivate ties with the ethnic groups as an insurance policy and to maybe gain some leverage over the government, you know. I hope we don't have to go back to those days because some are advocating for the short term. Maybe we have to do that because just to solve the problems along the border that we have now. You know, the military doesn't have, you know, their power doesn't reach to all parts of the border areas, right? So we have to work with the ethnic group. That's the reality. You know, when we did the humanitarian assistance, we had to recognize the reality that we had to work with the ethnic groups as well. But the problem also is that even among the Karens, there are also many groups, you know, some really working to, you know, for their cause. Some have also other motivations. And so it's difficult when it comes to the border. And it became, and that's was the challenge when we did the humanitarian assistance. How do we guarantee that the assistance will be delivered? And at first, we tried to work with the Red Cross, but then they said the Myanmar Red Cross. But then people said that the Myanmar Red Cross was an extension of the military regime. So we had to work with the KNU forces on the ground. But then among the KNU, you also have the BGF, the KNLA. The BGF is controlled by Shittu, who also more or less run this place called Chue Gogo, you know, where all these activities are taking place. So that was very, very difficult. And so you know, but getting back to your point, how do we get the ethnic groups to, you know, to engage with the SAC? And when we talk about inclusive dialogue, how do we bring about inclusive dialogue? Are we going to bring everyone to the table? I don't think we can do that right away. I remember even in Cambodia, we had 4 parties, right? 3 in the coalition and Hun Sen. I was in Bogor. They had the first Jakarta informal meeting. All the 4 parties were there, but they could not sit in the same room. So the foreign minister of Indonesia at that time, Ali Arhat, had to go around talking with every party to encourage them to sit in the same room. Eventually, it took 2 or 3 more meetings before they could sit at the same table. So I think we have to really think about how do we, maybe we need some kind of proximity talks. You know, Thailand talking with the KNU, the Chinese talking with their groups, the Indians talking with the Chin. And eventually, maybe we can have them sit, but they might not be sitting at all of them at the table. Could be that. So I think it's a challenge, but we have to have some degree of inclusivity. But to what degree, how to achieve inclusive dialogue, I think we have to think about that as well.
All right. Thank you very much, Kap. I mean, so perhaps I think that looking forward as the Philippines to share, maybe Thailand and Philippines working together would be something really important on the issue of Myanmar as well. So for the next round of questions, anyone have questions? I will collect a few questions at once, and then I will ask ambassadors to respond to your questions. Anyone in the room, please. Yes, please introduce yourself and then ask your questions.
Minglaba, my name is Mikandoi and I'm Mon Ethnic Zoo volunteer and I founded the non-profit youth organization in Myanmar named for the future Myanmar. And as we all know that many Myanmar's students, refugees, and youth workers are like flee to the Myanmar. Some of them are being, how can I say, living in Thailand due to the ongoing conflict. So my question is like, do these people has any influence in the Thailand foreign policy, especially in the Long 10 regional planning? I'm really glad that we all know that ASEAN 5 Points consensus is not working right now. Yeah, thank you.
All right, we got one of the questions on the influence of the groups in Thailand towards Myanmar policies. Any others, please? Ambassadors.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Ciasak, for a very wise and insightful presentation. My name is Pat Bourne. I'm the Ambassador of Ireland in Thailand and also covering Myanmar from here. Just a brief question. You've talked a little bit about the role in Thai foreign policy of constructive engagement with, I suppose, the de facto government in Myanmar, and you've just addressed a question about engagement with the ethnic armed organizations. But what about engagement with the NUG? Or the the kind of the post 2020 election opposition. Where does that figure in your recommendations on Thai foreign policy? Thank you.
Thank you. For the first round, I mean, I will circulate back to ambassadors, please. I mean, the first one on the influence of Myanmar groups in Thailand, and at the same time, from ambassador from Ireland, it's a one on the engagement, particularly with NUGs, please.
Well, when I talked about Thailand having a coherent strategy on Myanmar, it also involves the internal dimension, coordination among agencies. And one important dimension is the humanitarian dimension, the human situation on the border. People coming into Thailand, because of the fighting, because of their concern about conscription and their children. We have to think about them, how to take care of them, because eventually their peace will return to Myanmar. We don't want a lost generation. We have to help them, because over the long term, it's about how the people feel about Thailand. That's very important. And so they're here in Thailand. We have to take care of them, and do the best that we can to meet their needs. I was at the border. I saw, the schools set up by NGOs providing education for young children, teenagers, and was amazed. They were doing very well. They spoke English very well. So we have to have a policy. First, the refugees. They've been here a long time, and Leon is there, and now assistance has been cut off. What do we do? Because many of them have become Thai citizens already, So we have to think about integrating them into society. It's a difficult decision, but we have to make that decision now. Second, those who are here, let's provide them with proper documentation so that they will not be, subject to extortion, let's say. So why don't we do that? Third is that they're here and we should give them a safe zone to talk, and we should engage with them on, because all of them are in Chiang Mai, so we should use their presence, the presence of the leadership of many of them in Chiang Mai to have, talks, informal or formal, whatever, with them. So this is how I see, how we handle the situation of having so many people from Myanmar in Thailand. On your question, Ambassador, the problem is that when you sit down at the same table with NUG and the ethnic groups, the NUG cannot talk on behalf of all the ethnic groups. They're in the process of trying to do that, but they cannot do it right now. Even among the ethnic groups, if you ask them, how do you see the first step, none of them would voluntarily provide any answer, because they have to look at the others. And so this is the problem right now, and they need a facilitator to help them sort things out, really. And I belong to, the APRC, the Asian Peace and Reconciliation Council, whose office is on the 11th floor. Dr. Surikit is the chairman. We are engaging track 2 diplomacy. Maybe you should utilize track 2 diplomacy, because we've had meetings with the senior general, and which, because we're track 2, we can talk about many things that you cannot talk in track 1. With flexibility, maybe we can probe, to see where the common grounds are. And then those in the track 1 can build on that. But track 1 and track 2 will have to go together. So I'm trying to, in Myanmar, we have to be proactive. We have to have a strategy. We have to have a multi-prong. We have to have a multi-track diplomacy if we are serious.
All right. Thank you, Kap. Next round, please. I'm sure that you have several. Leon, please.
Yeah, I would like first to make one comment, which is also related to democracy and what we have mentioned at the beginning in the story, the Bangkok process. In fact, at the Bangkok process, Thaksin, the Prime Minister Thaksin, came with one roadmap, which was going very far, giving a lot of responsibility to the opposition, to Aung San Suu Kyi, and so on. But what happened? The General Tan Shwe did not take anything about this, but the idea of the roadmap. And you see how it started, his process to go to a disciplined and flourishing democracy. And in fact, if democracy came into Burma, it's not because of Aung San Suu Kyi or all these sanctions and things like that. It's only because the dictator decided to move that way. So this is, I think, one comment. Then my question, I think there are 2 or 3. One, and I appreciate the way you have described the situation, how complex it is. But I think when you talk about dialogue, I think dialogue is impossible today. One, because SSC and the dictator is not really interested. And 2, who will be the interlocutor on the other side or any side? So I believe, and I would like to have your comment on this, that one of the role of Thailand, and maybe leading role also, is to convince the other neighbors as well as ASEAN. One of our main tasks is to build up a more credible opposition, which can be at a certain time the one at the table. As we have said, you cannot have 20 people around the table. The SSC knows so well how to divide and rule. It has been their strategy for so long. So there is really a big role, I believe, for Thailand. And one question is, two questions. One is, end of July, normally, the state of emergency should end if you want to have election in December. Do you know what will be the setup after July? Are they going to go to this National Security and Defense Council and having maybe the former Vice President Min Swe becoming the interim president or something different? And do you think that there is a little bit of room for making some move because of that? Because there will be a transition period of time. And my other question is, as you have said, the situation in Myanmar today is so bad, the worst than since the independence. And if you take cumulatively the fact that already before 20 million of people are living under the poverty line, 2, the American cut, almost half of the assistance is no longer there. And then you have the earthquake and so many victims. Those people who have nothing left, maybe for today, tomorrow, and maybe a few weeks more, they will try to find something where they are or moving to Yangon, but nothing is there for them. Don't you think that maybe one scenario is to have in September, October, thousands of people coming to the Thai border? And if it is the case, what are you going to do?
That's overloaded of questions. So, ambassadors, please.
Well, about the election, what will happen? We hope that it could be something like when they did the transition during the time of General Deng Seng. The election in the first one, 2010, was not. The military dominated the parliament, and then they gradually opened up the space for the opposition. But I think what's clear, why are they having election? Are they having election simply to legitimize the regime? Given that if it's not fair and free, most countries will not recognize the results. Why are they doing that? I see it first, the senior general wants to relieve the pressure on him because he's also under a lot of internal pressure. Maybe the election will ease the domestic pressure on him. Second, he may see it as strengthening his bargaining position when the time comes for real dialogue with the oppositions. Right? And third, maybe having some legitimacy is better than no legitimacy. So he's hoping that China will recognize the election, India will recognize the election, and maybe some of the ASEAN countries will recognize the election. And maybe that's what they need to get by at the moment. Because before the earthquake, 2 days before the earthquake, I was invited to a conference in Naypyidaw, and the opening speech was given by the senior general. He read from a prepared text as usual, but then he spoke impromptu. He said, which got me thinking. He said that, Myanmar, we're in an advantage position if we think of we're strategically located. We have China to the north, the second biggest economy in the world, and major power. We have India, rising star, as our neighbor. We have ASEAN, one of the highest growth area, and also we have Russia. And then he didn't say it, but by way of implication is that the U.S. is in a lot of trouble. They're not going. They have their internal, they're in retreat, whatever. EU is also, not engaging outside in Asia. So maybe this is enough for us to get by. If we could have some legitimacy. It's not an ideal situation, but I think that's his thinking also. So, but how can we make this? This is an opportunity, maybe a small opening. How can we make it a bigger opening? It won't happen unless we try to make it happen. So the neighboring countries will have to take it upon themselves to do something, to send message to the military regime, to talk with the ethnic groups. And then how do we get the NUG to be in position to speak on behalf of the various ethnic groups? How do we do that? But I think that we have to really sit down. We have to, among ASEAN, get down to this, details, talk with the Chinese. I remember in Cambodia, sorry, I have to go back to Cambodia. Cambodia was in the talking points of every foreign minister of ASEAN when they went to the United States, when they went to China. It was Cambodia because Cambodia was a threat to the regional security. Now you don't have Myanmar on the talking points of the individual foreign minister when they go to China, when they go to the United States. And tell them, this is a situation. You have to come in. You have to be more proactive. You have to align your efforts with ASEAN. So maybe when the time comes for Philippines to take over the chairmanship, I think all of us will have to pitch in and do our part. Yeah, because I really don't see Myanmar in the talking points of the individual foreign ministers of ASEAN. So I don't know. Again, I sense that this could be an opportunity. But if we don't seize the opportunity and try to make it happen, it could go the other way.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. We have time for one last questions. Anyone have a burning questions that you would like to raise? Please, I see it's from over there.
Hi, I will try to be quick. My name is Noémie. I'm part of French Custom. So first of all, thank you for all those explanations. It was really clear. I have a question regarding organized crime in Myanmar. Since 2021, we have noticed that there is a real context of political insecurity in the area, which is used by organized crime to grow their activities. For example, we can talk about scam center or drugs issues. My question, please, is how can foreign policy be a tool to tackle down the issue of organized crime in Myanmar and its impact in Southeast Asia?
To be very frank, this problem has festered for a long time before all of us saw the impact, the human trafficking and all those people forced to work in Shweikoko in the north on the border with China. I went to Massaud when I was trying to facilitate the humanitarian assistance, delivery of humanitarian assistance. Who were on the flights? A lot of people. You wonder why they're going to Massaud. They're not tourists, and then suddenly they disappear across the border. So we've really turned a blind eye towards this problem, which has existed for some time, and it's another dimension of the instability in Myanmar. But in a good way, it's also a way of getting Western countries, other countries, to think about Myanmar. Because all of us, even though you may be in Europe, you may be in the United States, many have been preyed upon by these scam operations in Myanmar. So yes, we have to deal with it, to crack down. But I see it, unless we try to bring peace and stability back to Myanmar, we're going to have a very hard time dealing with this problem. And then, of course, the immediate term, we really have to, again, maybe not the concept of buffer state yet, but we have to deal with the various ethnic groups, at least on the Thai side of the border. We have to talk to them. We have to have dialogue. We have to talk about humanitarian assistance. We have to help them. And we also have to talk with them about the security situation along the border.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of the conversation today. Thank you, Ambassador Siasak Pongkekao, for the speech today. And then thank you all of you for coming to our events today as well. The next round of the seminars will be held on August 18, and the topic will be on Myanmar in geopolitical rivalry in the context of the Asia Pacific. So that will be focusing on Myanmar in the context of the world as well. So we look forward to welcome you here again at the centers. So thank you very much for today, and have a safe travel back to where you are. Thank you.